Hi, this is Justin Colletti from Sonic Scoop, coming at you from Joe Lambert Mastering. Today, thanks to B&H, we get to bring you a completely free 3-part series on intermediate and advanced compression techniques. We're not going to be just talking about the basics of compression, but really diving in deep to look at some best practices when it comes to parallel compression, serial compression, and sidechain compression. I think this one's going to be a lot of fun, so let's dive right in. First up, parallel compression. The idea behind parallel compression is that you're going to take a track and split it in two. And one version of this track, well, you will leave it completely untouched when it comes to compression. And the other version of this track, you'll compress pretty heavily. So parallel compression is going to try to help give us the best of both worlds here, allowing us to get the kind of dynamic human performance out of our uncompressed track with all the transient information and breath and life, and then to get some extra oomph and impact out of our compressed track, folding just a bit of that in underneath. This can be a really powerful technique, and it's one that a lot of great mixers use very often. And I want to show you not just how to do this, but a few best practices on how to do it really, really well to get really great results. So let's dive right into this one. Today I've got a mix-up from some friends and clients of mine over at DeGraw Sound. Really great studio in Park Slope, Brooklyn. This track sounds pretty amazing as it is without any additional mixing, just kind of faders at zero. So this is going to make our jobs a lot easier. But these same techniques apply on any tracks you get, whatever kind of state of repair they're in. Let's hear this one. Pretty good balances. Really nice so far. Let's jump in a little bit further, maybe into one of the later choruses. Man, again, already really great balance established here from the beginning, but I think we can add more impact, particularly to some of these percussion elements. The percussion elements sound pretty great as is. Let's hear them by themselves. Here's just the drums. Pretty good. But it looks like with these natural drum tracks, they've even given us the option of adding in some kind of sampled drums that are playing in the same rhythm. So here's our natural drums. And now with their sampled drums added in. So you can hear me taking that last track in and out, the sample drums. And those do add some oomph and add some power and impact to the drums. But I think we can do even better still by doing some parallel compression on these drums. Right now I'm going to be focusing on drums and only drums, but generally when I'm mixing, I'll do all of this in context. I generally want to hear the whole band while I'm making these changes. But just so that you can hear them really well, I'm going to isolate out the drums for this example. All right, so let's get our parallel track set up. The first thing to do to set up our parallel track is to create 2 stereo auxiliary tracks that we can route these drums to. So to create these stereo tracks, I'm going to go track, new, I'm going to create a stereo aux input. You can do this even quicker with some key commands. In Pro Tools, Shift Command N will bring that window right up. Command down, that'll change us to an aux input. Command right arrow, change into stereo. Hey, check it out. Even faster. So to set this up for parallel compression, the next thing that I want to do is make sure that all of these drum tracks are getting sent to both of these buses. And then I'm going to compress one of these buses and leave the other one completely uncompressed. The best way to do that is I'm going to highlight all of my drum tracks. Here, I'll highlight the one on the bottom, our last drum track, the room, and then come up here to the kick, highlight that one, great. And now in Pro Tools I can hit Shift, Option, and change my output path here to bus 1, 2. Great. So now all of these drum tracks are being sent out through bus 1, 2. Now I'm going to set up the input on both of these aux tracks to bus 1, 2. So all of my drums are going to both of these buses. Here, I'll name this first one drum bus, and then I'll name this second one parallel drums. And we're going to compress this second track, parallel drums. Real quick thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to solo safe both these tracks. So when I solo the drums, I can still hear my drum tracks through these buses. So I'm going to hit Command and click the solo button. And this will allow me to hear what's coming through these buses, even when I have the drums soloed. Great, let's hear these natural drums again. All right, now I'm going to turn on this parallel drum bus, and I'm going to add a compressor to this parallel drum bus. To make things really easy to follow along yourself, I'm going to show you that you can do this just using the stock plugins. So we're going to use today just the basic Dynamics 3 compressor limiter built into Pro Tools. So I'm bringing this guy up. I'll mute my regular bus and just listen to the parallel bus for now for this example. And I find that the best way to approach parallel compression is to go A, for a lot of compression, B, use a really fast attack time, and C, do a big heavy dose of bass and treble boost. And we'll get to that in a second, but this is an old technique called New York style compression. It's still popular to this day, and I think you get the most out of parallel compression when you're compressing with a fast attack time. This is because the whole point of our main uncompressed track is to let those transients through, while the whole point of our compressed track is to kind of level off those transients. So each kick and snare hit is really, really even in our compressed track, but we get that kind of natural dynamics and transients out of our main track. So we're looking to get really even transients out of our parallel track to fold in underneath the more flexible and varying transients of our main track. So to do this, I'm setting a really fast attack time. I'll set a really fast release, and I'll try to get a lot of compression. I'm talking about 10 dB of compression or more. Let's hear how that sounds. So it looks like on the gain reduction meter here, I'm getting between 12 and 18 dB of gain reduction. Let's hear this before and after compression. Here it is uncompressed. And now with the compression on. Wow, pretty dramatic effect, right? I mean, these sound like machine drums on steroids. If this was our only source of drums in the track, it might sound a little too artificial and a bit uninteresting. But if we can bring these in just a little bit under our main track, I think we're going to hear some tremendous benefit. But another thing I want to do is add that big bass and treble boost I was talking about. This way, we're not cluttering up our uncompressed drums by adding a whole lot of mid-range. And when we compress a signal really heavily, we're generally, accentuating the mid-range. So to accommodate for that, we're going to add an EQ after this compressor to boost the lows, boost the highs. And I'm talking about by a lot, like 10 dB. 10 dB boost at 100 Hertz, 10 dB boost at 10K. But we're only going to fold a little bit of this resulting radical sound in underneath our main drums. Let's try that EQ. So once again, to add this EQ, I'm going to use a stock Pro Tools plugin, just the EQ3 7-band plugin built into Pro Tools. And we're going to go straight for 100 Hertz here and boost it a lot, 10 dB. And then I'm going to come here to our high shelling filter and put it at 10K and boost that by about 10 dB. This is going to be a pretty dramatic effect. Let's hear it first without this EQ added. And now with it added on. Wow, that's a pretty dramatic effect. But we're just going to be tucking in a little bit of this underneath the uncompressed track, which allows us to kind of get away with even more boost. Now the reason we're doing this is to make sure our parallel compressed track doesn't clutter up the mid-range, and instead adds a little weight to the low end and a little bit of clarity and sparkle to the top. So let's go back and hear our drums one more time, this time the raw, uncompressed track, and then we'll fold in just a little bit of this compressed and EQ'd track. So you hear how that adds some real weight. I'm actually boosting these parallel drums a bit more than I might need to, but you'll see they're already pretty low. I mean, these are 12 dB lower than the main drums, but I think we'll also still get a pretty nice effect if it's all the way down here, let's say negative 18 dB, much lower than our mains. So here it is again with just the dry drums and then with the parallel compress added in just a little bit. Now this might be a little much for you still. One of the things I might look at doing would be to add a high-pass filter to this parallel drum track. That's going to take out the lowest of the low frequencies to get rid of some of the additional clutter we've added. Now, when you're doing parallel processing, your high-pass and low-pass filters won't necessarily respond exactly the way that you expect, due to the phase shift effect of EQ. The phase shift that's induced in a traditional EQ, like EQ3, doesn't really have a big effect when we're just boosting or cutting with a peaking filter or with a shelving filter. But as soon as we go to a high cut or a low cut filter, even though I might type in, say, 40 hertz here, the actual cut we hear may end up being a little higher than 40 hertz. We may be cutting out signal a little higher than 40 hertz based on the phase shift. That's a very technical idea, and we can go into that in some depth in the future. But long story short, when you're doing parallel processing, you don't really have to worry about the phase shift from EQ, except when you're doing high cuts and low cuts, at which point use your ears and don't look at the numbers, because the numbers can be misleading. So let's hear this now with a low cut or high pass filter engaged. Cool, so that's another setting that you could potentially play around with if your drums now start to step on other low frequency instruments or if you got too much low frequency buildup. Of course, another option is to just do a little bit less low frequency boost. But the ideas here are very simple. All we did was take our compressor and set a very fast attack time and a pretty fast release time. Then we brought down our threshold, so we were getting about 10 to 12 dB of compression. And then we adjusted our makeup gain to compensate for the amount of level we're bringing down with the compressor. Honestly, in most parallel compression situations, I'd probably use a slightly higher ratio than I have here at 3:1. So let's play around with these settings and see if we can get even more compression happening. We're going to start first off with just our plain drums, no compression. add in our compressor. Wow, that's mean. Let's try this with an even higher ratio. Try to switch from 3 to 1 to, say, 8 to 1. That sounds pretty demented by itself. It's going to sound even more demented when I add in this EQ curve, where we're boosting the low end, boosting the high end, and maybe cutting just a little bit of the extreme lows so that we don't get too bulky on this one. Let's hear how that sounds. Pretty savage, right? But now let's go back to our dry uncompressed drums, bring our parallel bus all the way down to 0, and just fold in a little bit. Now remember, I'm exaggerating these settings just a little bit for the educational context here. But with that said, you can go pretty extreme. It's allowed. When you're making these changes, I would recommend doing it in context with the entire track and not just listening to your parallel compressed tracks alone in isolation like we are now. So let's just do one more quick pass and make sure we're really adding something when it comes to hearing the stuff in context with the rest of the band. So I'm going to close out these settings and let's go ahead and listen. Starting with just the uncompressed drums and then folding in a little bit of parallel compressed drums. At the end there, I really jacked him up so you could hear how intense this stuff would be if we went full throttle with our parallel compressed tracks. But I think you can hear that sense of a little bit of extra weight and thunder added into the track with these parallel compressed drums when they're done with a very fast attack time and good healthy boost to the low end and the high end. Ultimately, you could do big cuts to the mid-range, but in this context, I find the low and high-end boost more satisfying and more fun. It's so rare that we get to boost indiscriminately and not have to feel guilty about it in mixing, but this is one of those cases where, feel free to go wild. This same technique can also apply when it comes to things like bass. Here, I'll leave our parallel track muted. But something that a lot of folks do with their bass tracks is to split them and distort kind of one half, maybe just the high frequency half, leaving the lower frequencies undistorted. So let's try out the same idea with bass. This time, I'm going to create a mono aux input, and I'll create 2 of them. And now I'll send our bass out through, let's say, just bus number 3. And I will set the input for our bass buses to be bus number 3. It's always a great idea to name these things. I'll solo safe these tracks once again. And now, this time, I'm going to apply EQ to both of these tracks. My parallel bass bus, I'll only include the higher frequencies, say those frequencies 500, 800, 1K and above, and just affect those frequencies at about 500 or maybe 1K and above, just our upper frequencies. And we're just going to compress and distort those for a little extra added hair. So let me pull this up. We'll hear for a moment just our parallel bass bus. All right, and let's try adding some hair to that sound. This time I'm going to try to find a fun distortion plugin. We'll go here under harmonic and see what we can grab. There's some really great stuff in here. I love this one, the Decapitator by Sound Toys, but let's just use our built-in air distortion and apply it to the bass bus. So let's take this now and fold it in under our main bass. Here's first our bass without any processing, and then adding in a little bit of this high frequency distorted bass. Now here a little bit goes a long way, but I think we'll get even better results if we compress both of these basses just a little bit. First, let's grab a compressor for our main bass bus. Now again, in a real world mix, the best way to do all of this is in context. You don't want to play around with this stuff in solo like I am right now. So if you are mixing this way, get out of the habit of it fast. This again is just for kind of educational purposes, just so you can kind of hear these effects at an extreme. And I do recommend that you play around with these effects at the extreme to hear what they do. But when it comes to mixing, you're trying to train your ear for subtlety. So just add these into the mix when everything's playing in context. So let's try that now. Here's our main bass with everything else. None of the parallel distorted bass. Pretty solid. You can really hear that bass line as is. Let's start folding in some of this compressed, distorted parallel bass, with just the high frequency hair being added. So we've added a lot of weight and articulation and impact just by making some very subtle tweaks. Now, are these the final places that I'd wind up? No, not necessarily. I'm trying to make some very extreme moves and some very subtle moves to help you kind of hear these differences. But I want you to start experimenting with these yourself. Open up your own session, whether you're in Pro Tools or Logic or Nuendo or Cubase or Cakewalk, whatever you might be using, and try some parallel processing on your drums. Also try it maybe on your bass. And remember, parallel processing doesn't just have to be about parallel compression. You can also do parallel EQ, parallel harmonic distortion, parallel effects. One important thing to remember here is that you'll want to have a delay compensation turned on if you don't already. Without delay compensation, you could get significant phasing issues as you try some of these approaches. But remember, other instruments besides just drums and bass can benefit from parallel compression. In fact, back in the Motown days, the Motown engineers often used parallel processing on vocals, doing some kind of heavy compression and some addition of high frequency to the lead vocal tracks. And they found this was a great way to preserve some of the natural dynamics and human feel of the main track while adding in just a little bit of processed sheen underneath. These parallel strategies can be a very effective, very fun approach to adding tone, clarity, and power to your mixes. Well, I hope this was a useful exercise for you guys. It's been fun going through this stuff with you and fun working on this track. So tune in next time when we go more in depth to serial compression and sidechain compression. If you want more great free tips and tutorials like these, go to B&H, sign up for their newsletter in the audio section there. Go to sonicscoop.com, sign up for our newsletter. We'll keep you abreast of what's going on the site, new video content as it comes out, new articles. So thanks again. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop. We're at Joe Lambert Mastering. I'm coming at you courtesy of B&H. Thanks for hanging out with me on the video blog. See you next time.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.